A warm welcome to every one of you being here today, and a warm welcome to all of you participating online. Thank you for being here to discuss this highly topical and important topic. My name is Björn Källström. I work for the European Parliament, and we are one of the co-organizers today, together with Christina from the Europe Direct office in Lund, and Simon from, I need to read this short and sweet name of your organization, Global Policy Research Group EU Academy. Thanks for organizing this together with us today. Why are we here? Why are we addressing this matter? Well, I find two principal reasons. One, as it says in the invite, biodiversity is essential to human life, the planet as we know it, but our ecosystems are being depleted. Secondly, while Sweden was an indeed honest broker when presenting the Nature Restoration Regulation Compromise proposal during the Swedish presidency, the government then voted against its own proposal, and we now fear that Sweden might break the law by not fulfilling its nature conservation obligations by 2030. For someone like myself, this is not entirely simple to understand. And I am therefore very grateful to Professor Selly, who very kindly has agreed to guide us through this maze and moderate today's discussion. Please give Professor Selly a warm welcome. The floor is yours.
Right, I hope you can hear me. Thanks very much, Björn, for the very kind introduction, and also to you, Christina, Simon, and everybody from Europa Direct for inviting me to moderate this. It's a great honor. Thanks, everybody, for coming. My name is Fari Borselli. I'm a professor at the Department of Political Science here in Lund. I should say that my background has been, through most of my own work life, international climate politics and biodiversity politics. That also includes the EU and its recent Fit for 55 package, but mostly work on land use and forest use and land use conflicts in the global south, particularly in the Amazon. We have an ongoing project on Colombia here at Lund University. I did previously work in Peru on this case, also on Uganda in a case study with colleagues. And then eventually I came to this topic of polarization in Swedish forest management, so something that I had not been familiar with earlier too much, but I realized that there are quite a few parallels between land use and forest use conflicts you have in other parts of the world and what's happening here. Obviously a clash of economic interests and ecological interests. And if you listen to what Björn just told us, it is indeed a little conundrum that we had Sweden first requesting that the plan which serves as the basis of the regulation we're talking about today was presented during the Swedish presidency, and then a bit later down the road this was voted down by the Swedish government, or voted against by the Swedish government. That already hints at a bit of these, maybe more hardened types of coalitions or different camps we have on forest use in Sweden due to very different interests and different values. When you look what we're talking about at the EU Nature Restoration Regulations, may be important to say that this is the first comprehensive law of its kind to be implemented across the entire continent, and that all member states are actually obliged to follow it. So this is binding law. It's a key component of the EU Biodiversity Strategy and also of the European Green Deal. And a majority of the member states, as well as many experts, still believe that implementing the concrete actions outlined in the plan are urgent. Why are they urgent? Because Europe's natural ecosystems are in rapid decline, as most of you will know here, with over 80% of habitats in poor condition, and the remaining biodiversity is under constant threat. So with that background, and then seeing that the Swedish government voted against it, and looking at the interest constellations within the country, me and my co-workers found this is an important topic to look at, and we now have a new theme placed at the Pufendorf Institute here in Lund that will work for a year on the theme of polarization in Swedish forestry. So I think that's why I'm here. But other than that, I'm just learning because it's an intricate landscape, and I'm therefore very much looking forward to the speeches by our two invited panelists. The first speaker will be Emily Nielsen from WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature. She will talk about the challenges that we are facing with implementing the EU Nature Restoration Regulation here in Sweden. Emily is an expert for Swedish nature conservation politics. She studied both biology and political science, which has done, or at least some courses in political science, as she told me. She has been a specialist on EU restoration regulation, legislation on species protection and conservation budgeting over the last years. Before that, she worked for the Swedish Board of Agriculture on the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, amongst other things. And she also worked with national policy making, with the Swedish Parliament, so Riksdagens Committee for Environment and Agriculture, and also with the development of national biodiversity policies. She also worked as an environmental consultant, and we're glad to say she has been, I mentioned, she studied conservation biology and partly political science. She has done that here at Lund University, so she's a graduate from the university here in town. The second speaker will be Hjalmar Aurén. He's a municipal ecologist here at the city of Lund since 2023. Before, he worked as a nature conservation officer at Skåne County's Nature Conservation Unit. And he's also had an academic career as a research associate at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU, in a very big national environmental monitoring program for landscape inventories called NEELS, that is still used and actually quite spreading and quite popular, and where we also a bit linked to with the research I mentioned before. Hjalmar is also linked to Lund University. He has his bachelor in biology from here, and he's also been research assistant at the Center for Environmental and Climate Research, CEC, on the questions of competition between wild and honeybees, a topic that's definitely related to what we're talking about today. So for my introduction, and without further ado, I would invite Emily to give her first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about this important topic. I've already got an introduction, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the nature restoration law, the content and its implementation so far. And this image represents pretty well how our view on this law. We think it can contribute to a big shift in the nature of Europe. And we were very happy when this law was finally decided in August last year. And also a bit surprised, to be honest, because it had been some drama about this law. So we were worried it wouldn't become decided. It was after Hungary, they decided to change their early yes to no. This got very dramatic. But in the end, we had Austria changing their opinion from no to yes, so that was enough for a qualified majority. So in the end, we had 20 countries supporting this law. And unfortunately, Sweden was not one of those countries. But they did do a good job in Sweden when they had their presidency, and to put this question forward. And that's because also they're supposed to be neutral in that role. So we were very happy that they kept it neutral. So this is what we would like to see more of: restored landscapes all over Europe. And here's two examples what nature restoration might be. One is a picture from a project of semi-natural grassland in Uppland, and the other one is from a wetland in Stockholm area. And there also seemed to be a big public support for restoring Sweden's nature. 7 out of 10 think it's important. And we have done earlier polls on this too, and it showed even bigger support, and also support for having regulations about this. So nature restoration can be many things. Here's another example from a project in Hanöbukten. is restoring eelgrass meadow. Can also be transformed into continuous cover forestry. Here a project in close to Tiveden. Another last example is where we established a fish migration route. So we already talked about this a little bit, why we need a restoration law. But of course, it's to bend the curve. We have a very clear decreasing trend for biodiversity, despite big efforts, I would say. And Europe is one of the continents that have the highest proportion of land use, such as agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure. And is also the continent where global warming, where climate warming is happening the fastest. And this is for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is a lack of implementation of the existing EU legislation that existed before this. And last, this is also a response to the new commitments in the UN Convention on Biodiversity. So, and the overarching goals in this law is to preserve or restore 20% of land and sea by 2030, and by 2050 restore all ecosystems in need of restoration. And the purpose, of course, to maintain biodiversity and resilient ecosystems, but also to strengthen food security and meet the EU international commitments when it comes to both climate and biodiversity. And when I first heard about this law, I was actually a bit skeptical because I thought it was a bad idea to have a new law just because the old ones were not implemented. But then I found out it was very smart constructed. We had these time-bound goals for implementation. So it connected to the earlier legislation, like the Birds Directive, Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive, and the Marine Strategy Directive. And also had some complementary additional legal demands. And this law is also very important for coordinating all the EU legislation on nature conservation. We see several positive effects of nature restoration. Of course, it benefits nature, but it often also has a positive effect on climate, especially by increasing the uptake by land. And also gives better food security when we have a more sustainable agriculture with populations of pollinators that are thriving, and in Sweden, for example, more natural pastures. We also have very good effects on human health, and most obvious we can see this in urban areas when we have urban green spaces. It decreases air pollution and noise, and it's also very beneficial to people when they use these areas. And last, we've seen in several studies that this is beneficial for the national economy, but we still would need some economical instrument to make this positive also for the landowners and business. So I will say some about the content, not in detail, but the most central articles I would say is number 4 and 5, and they have these time-bound goals to restore 30% of the habitat types that's specified in the Habitats Directive until 2030, and then 60% by 2040 and 90% by 2050. And the aim is to reach a favorable reference area for these habitat types. And that means to preserve them enough area and quality to reach to preserve them long term. And you should also take restoration measures for the species in these regulations. And then Article 5 is pretty much the same, but about marine areas. There's a specific article about urban ecosystems, and there's a legal demand to have no net loss of urban green spaces and urban tree canopies by 2030. And after 2030, you're supposed to have an increasing trend of these areas. Article 9 about free-flowing rivers and floodplains. Basically, it means removing artificial barriers like dams, culverts, and turbines, for example. And then we have a specific article about the pollinators, and the legal demand there is to stop the decreasing trend of populations of pollinators by 2030, and after 2030 have an increasing trend. And then we have Article 11, which is about increasing the biodiversity in the whole agricultural landscape. And this should be followed by increasing index for agricultural birds, and also by increasing 3 indexes. One is for butterflies connected to grasslands. Another one is about increasing the proportion of landscapes elements that provide a high biodiversity. And the third is about organic carbon stocks in mineral soils. And they also have percentage goals about restoring drained peatlands. And then we have Article 12 about forest ecosystems, where you should increase the biodiversity in the general forest ecosystem landscape. So these 2 articles are complementary to the ones about the specific habitat types. So for example, increasing the diversity of tree species, forest connectivity, and the amount of dead wood. So what does all this mean in practice? Well, we will have to protect more nature. We will have to increase conservation management in these areas. But we will also need to adapt land use to be more nature-oriented. For example, the forestry, fishery, and agriculture. Implementation in the member states, right now they need to develop national restoration plans. But they have to start implementation already, even before they have these plans ready. And in Sweden, we have recently seen big cuts in the state investments in nature restoration and conservation. Even last year, continued. And the Swedish Environmental Agency is tasked with developing a proposal for a national restoration plan. But unfortunately, they have very tight instruction. They need to put it at a minimum level and use all the exceptions that are possible. And what is worse is that in December, it was decided that the reporting to the EU Habitat Directive about the state of nature and these habitat types and species, it should be changed. It should no longer be based on knowledge or ecological knowledge. And this will impact very much the extent that you need to restore. Yeah, and some key message, I will not say everything here, but it's the focus on the purpose of this law when we make this national restoration plan in Sweden. And it's also very important to ensure sufficient scientifically based knowledge and to have ecological based reference areas. And use the existing EU funds for this. And also invest more from the state in this. And it's also important for the government to facilitate for the private sector and business to contribute financially to nature restoration. So just want to point this out that the favorable reference area, it's been very debated and it's like the core of the poodle here because it affects how much restoration we will see in Sweden and in other member states. The good thing is that this is now a legal term in this law, and in the law it's also stated that you should use the best available information. So now we have an ongoing consultation process, and I would very much encourage all of you to take part in that. And then in June we will have this change reporting. And in February next year, the authority is going to present a proposal for a national restoration plan, and in the autumn, it's going to be sent to the Commission. So you may get the message now that the political ambition is very low in Sweden, but this is a very long-term work, so we still have good hopes that this is going to lead to something good. I'm just last here going to summarize some of the challenges and the opportunities in Sweden. And except that we have this political low ambition, we also have powerful agents that are against this, like the forest industry. And we also see a trend of decreasing reliance on facts and disinformation in the world and also in Sweden, I would say. And also an economic priority to other issues from the state budget. But the good things is that we have a big public support for nature restoration. And we are a very sparsely populated country. And we have quite good knowledge of where we have valuable areas. And also a very high competence on nature conservation. So, thank you. That was everything.
Well, thanks very much, Emily. Then the next speaker will be Hjalmar Aurén, and after Emily gave us this overview of the general context in Sweden, also the obstacles, we will now hear about the context here for this region, for Lund and Skåne.
Thank you. All right, thank you for inviting me. So I work here in Lund as a municipal ecologist, and I will talk more about this on a local scale, regional, and within the municipality. So just to start with where we are, this is a quite weird map of Skåne. It's called in English, it's the National Land Cover Database. So it's basically showing what the land is, the land use is. And as you can see, this very bright part is agricultural fields, arable land. So it's quite a lot. It's dominating in this region, but it's also forests and lakes and urban areas. So that's the background, and the nature here is very influenced by human, and it's been for thousands of years. And in the latest 200 years, it's become even more intense. We use the landscape a lot, so to say. Yeah. And then in this region and in Lund, some important habitats or ecosystems is grasslands, and they are semi-natural. They are affected by humans, but it's still considered being a sort of semi-natural. And they have pastures, meadows, wooden pastures, and heaths, Ljunghedar, for example. And then we have woodlands or forests, and then it's often broadleaf forests, sandy habitats, which is along the coast, but also inland. We have aquatic habitats, both marine and freshwater ecosystems. And we also have, we used to have a lot, but we still have wetlands, and that's bogs and fens, for example. And with such diversity of habitats, we have the most species-rich region in Sweden. Yes. And this is actually supposed to say land use in Western Scania, but yeah, it was a type. So from the last 1,000 years, which is really interesting. I think it's showing the shift from more natural ecosystems such as semi-natural grasslands, meadows and pastures from the early 1,000 years back, and a shift to in the latest 200 years to arable land. It's very dramatic. It's actually one of the biggest impacts on nature in this region, and it shows by the other diagram that you can see, which is maybe a bit hard to see, but it's where we have the most red listed species based on land use in Scania, and that is the forests and in the agricultural sector. So it shows that these natural habitats have disappeared and been replaced with intensive land management, and that's why we have a lot of red listed species now. And yes, and this is So I will talk a little bit about ecological integrity in Europe and Scania. And this map shows ecological integrity, which is an ecosystem's ability to support and uphold ecological processes and rich biodiversity. And the redder it gets, the badder the situation is. So that landscape cannot withhold these systems, or when it's red, it says that these ecological processes are not working properly, or the biodiversity is not supported. And Scania is very similar to the continental Europe, where we have a lot of fragmented landscapes. And this also shows when Sweden last time Sweden reported to Europe, the European Union, the status of the Natura 2000 habitats. Grasslands, for example, is the one that is in bottom. The status of those habitats are really bad, and that also shows for the some animals or organisms such as butterflies, the last one, which is also looking really bad. I skipped that one. And then if we go to Lund municipality, here you can see the where it's in Scania, and it's quite similar to Scania as a whole, with the proportion of land use. It's actually quite well represented. It's very urbanized. It's dominated by arable land and then also forests. I can show you here. Yeah, this is the land use. So there's arable land and forests and some grasslands, sandy habitats. Yes. And then if we go to the regulation, the nature restoration regulation, there's a lot of parts of it that will be relevant in Lund, so to say. And for example, here you have the Natura 2000 sites in Lund, which is where the Article 4 and 5 will be focused in the near future. We have the very large, as you can, maybe I can try over here, we have the Revingehed, which is a sandy grassland, but also a lot of wetlands and lakes. And we also have Klingavälsån, which is a meandering stream with a lot of waders, birds. And then leading on to where we should focus these efforts, because we can't do everything everywhere. We need to focus where to put the money and the resources. And I believe the work that's been done by the County Administrative Board of Skåne, Länsstyrelsen, they have done some analysis of the green infrastructure in the whole of Scania. And this map is showing the area of Lund, and it's sort of tells where we have the hotspots for biodiversity still in our landscape. And it's very clear that there are some areas that are more important rather than others to focus these efforts. So for grasslands, it's more focused on the eastern part of Lund, and also the woodlands, and also the sandy habitats. We have these larger areas, which is Revingehed. And also, when it comes to aquatic and freshwater, we have the Kävlingeå stream and some parts of Höjå stream, and two big lakes as well, which is more, they are like hotspots for such efforts. And I believe that to achieve such, is in near time, to reach these goals in near time, we need to cooperate between authorities, organizations, landowners, companies, and others, because it's supposed to be implemented very fast. And for example, we have the water council. We have three water councils here in Lund, because we have 3 streams going through the municipality, and we are a member of those 3 water councils, which is an organization that is based on different parts of society. So it's authorities, and it's NGOs, and it's also landowners, farmers, which makes it, we have a large representation in the organization. Okay. So I think, and those councils are very, the restoration efforts there are very, I think they're doing well, and the success is due to this broad representation. And we're also, the municipality is also a member of the Biosphere Reserve candidate Storkriket. So hopefully in September we will know if we will be a biosphere. And and the goal for this biosphere is to work towards sustainable development, but also be a role for the rest of society. Yeah. So yeah, this is also something about Article 11, the agricultural systems. I think regenerative farming could be a way forward to work with that article, but I will not talk too much about it because my time is running out. So I will just talk some of the things that is going on within the municipality right now when it comes to nature restoration. So a couple of years ago, the municipality bought Haslemölla Gård, Haslemölla Farm, which is located outside of Veberöd. And it's not a very big piece of land, but it's still quite alright. And it's very rich in biodiversity. We have done several surveys of the area, and it showed a high amount of red-listed species, for example. And this is due to pre-industrial agricultural methods, such as mowing, grazing. And it's sort of like a Lund in miniature. It's woodlands and it's grasslands, sand, and freshwater ecosystems or habitats in this area. And we have done a lot of different nature conservation measures to maintain this diversity. As you can see here on this picture here, we have this. It's called the prescribed burning, naturvårdsbränning in Swedish, which will favor a lot of different types of bees, for example, that lives in this area. And we also work with the mowing and grazing, for example. Okay. So yeah, and this is, I think that, this is what it looks like when we work with restoration in Lund. And we have quite a high ambition in Lund, I think. We've been doing this for quite a while now. It's not every municipality that works with nature restoration because of, the money needs to be put somewhere else. But in Lund, it's a thing that is prioritized. And then some challenges with this nature restoration in Lund. We do not really know about where all those Natura 2000 habitats and species are in the landscape. We lack the knowledge. We have a lot of information, but we do not know everything. And then, there's some other challenges, but I think one of the most important one is the economic and personal. We don't really have resources to work to scale up this work. That's what's limiting us right now. So I think I will stay there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helmut, and also Emily again. I would invite both of you up again, and I would probably take the other table respectively in order to start with a few rounds of questions. You've given us very comprehensive overviews, obviously, so some of my questions might sound redundant, but it might also be good to maybe concentrate on a few points and hear your views about it and where you agree or maybe differ. And from what I heard from both of you, it's very clear that the implementation issues we have, they're not the same across the board. There are certain areas where we can be more hopeful, and there are certain areas where, obviously, like forests, that doesn't seem to be the case. So you flagged a few possible solutions and ways forward, but if I ask you realistically, with the current situation you're finding, knowledge issues, power issues, and so forth, projecting 5 years from now, where will we be on track in Sweden? Or maybe, if you want to answer that way locally, where will we not be on track? What do you think is realistic?
Start with Sweden.
I don't think we will be on track. Our organization, we're going to evaluate this work, both at an EU level, all the member states, both this autumn and next year when the plans are going to be finished. But I don't think it's gonna be fully there. But one thing that is very important is that this reporting is not done the way it's planned to. We hope that the EU Commission will put a clear message to Sweden that this is not okay, to not base it on ecological knowledge anymore.
Right.
So if that happens, if they're not allowed to do as they plan, then we think it's much higher probability.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to comment on this? Where do you see biggest chances for progress and where rather not?
Well,
in implementing the restoration regulation in Skåne and
yeah, I think on some parts it's a big challenge because we have like such degraded nature in Lund and Scania. So to get back on that same level as of biodiversity and ecosystem function, it's a lot that needs to be done, and especially with like nutrient deployment, for example, and the use of pesticides, which is, I think it's a problem that you not often think about, but it's gonna be, a challenge. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds actually more pessimistic, your answers right now, than some things I picked up from your presentations, where I found some areas at least didn't look so bad. So maybe let's zoom in a bit on this being a national problem and a regional problem at the same time. So we heard the larger scope from Emily and your focus here on the municipality, on Skåne region. I'll just throw this at you. It might be provocative, might be naive, but we heard on the one hand that we have severe degradation issues, as you mentioned, here in the south. From what I know, humbly, we have lots of plantations, forest plantations in the north. So obviously slightly different types of land uses in Sweden. In our exchange, I guess if I misunderstood, correct me, still the level of biodiversity is bigger here in southern Sweden than it is in northern Sweden. Right?
At least when it comes to species, not maybe habitats.
Not habitats, yeah. So there are differences between northern and southern Sweden. You showed us a map where you also showed that, in terms of restoration capacities, it's as bad here in southern Sweden as it is in many continental European areas. So, long story short, where I'm going with this is, while it's always nice to have an encompassing approach, but with obviously some resistance in the current government, problems with funding, should we more go for a regional approach? Is this the way forward? Do northern and southern Sweden need different answers to this problem?
Well, also the regional level is very dependent on national investments.
Right.
But if this government are very pro, they say they are very pro-business. So if they would at least focus on facilitating for the private sector to contribute more to this, that would be a big step forward. And I also hope that when they see all these positive effects of restoration, that when they get more known, that they will change their mind a bit.
Okay, that's some ray of hope here. Hjalmar, what do you think? I mean, you're coming from a regional perspective. So
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a need for a national, like, a whole level perspective of it. So, and we noticed when it comes to the water councils, which are very forward when it comes to water restoration here in Lund and Scania. The national government is not really we don't get the support that we need because we're so forward. So they often want us to spread information about us to other councils, but it's I think that should be on a natural level because we don't have the time or resources to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so a bit of a diversified answer, obviously, and implementing regionally, but hopefully the funding and the support more nationally. You already hinted quite a lot when we're asking why are things the way they are, why are things the way you presented them, why this turn and change of heart from the governmental side, and why this lack of money and so forth, the changes in the evaluation procedure you mentioned where knowledge has been taken out of the equation, and all this sounds worrying. So obviously power and knowledge are recurring issues that you mentioned, resources, but maybe before we go into these obvious points, I was curious about one thing when we look at how we can maybe push things forward, being a bit more optimistic, and that is public support and public attention. When in your presentation, Emily, you mentioned that's actually not so bad, and that surprised me a bit positively, because I'm not a big expert on mindsets and ideology polls here in Sweden currently, but I would simply think from recent election results in Sweden and also across Europe that environmental attention and environmental topics have not exactly increased in ranking in public debates in the last years. So long story short, would you say that the topic has landed enough awareness in the public debate in Sweden, or would you like to see much more of it? And if so, how?
Short answer, I think it hasn't landed. I think it needs more focus. Yeah.
You sounded optimistic.
Yeah. I mean, we know that even though the interest for environmental issues are decreasing in Sweden, it's still quite big, and it's a very big worry for many Swedes. But biodiversity issues get a lot less attention, of course, than climate. And then they use a little bit false climate arguments sometimes to not do ambitious biodiversity measures. So that's a problem. But we hope that this is going to get attention, the planned way of reporting, because it's not only an issue for biodiversity, it's also about having a knowledge-based society.
Yeah. Maybe sticking to this a bit. When I mentioned some research we're doing here in Lund, and obviously Lund is one of the, if I may say, world-leading universities on sustainability issues, and we're trying to have a holistic view. So one of the big programs we have here is called Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in a Changing Climate. So it tries to bring together biodiversity, climate change. We have also a new excellency cluster or profile area on nature-based solutions. So all of this suggests that there are big synergies, obviously, between these topics. And they are, you mentioned that, areas with lower biodiversity and lower restoration capacities are also more amenable and can be impacted by droughts and other climatic impacts, right? But there also seems to be conflicts, not only synergies between these two topics. So when you mention funding, you mentioned already with attention, would you say that the money is going more into climate change and not concertedly into the synergy between climate and biodiversity? Is that an issue?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, Lund as a municipality works a lot with the climate change when it comes to infrastructure and transportation. But I think we're just now starting to realize that we need to work with biodiversity and the connection between land use and climate change. But it's not as far ahead as other parts of the change. Yeah.
That was the direction in which you also pointed.
Yeah, and I think it also should be more focused in public about the good effects on climate from nature restoration.
Yeah.
I think that's a key factor.
From all I can say with this aspect of collision, I mean, I mentioned forestry a bit. It's not the only topic, of course, when we talk about restoration. But if we look at Norrland and the big forest plantations we have there, when there's big debates, there's some scholars who say that is still good for biodiversity because at some point old growth forests maybe do not absorb enough carbon anymore or have a certain type of biodiversity advantage. I would doubt that. It's an open debate. But clearly the argument of clear cutting, which is so dominant on forestry here in Sweden, if I may just add that info, we only have 5% continuous cover forestry in this country, actually less than 5%. So most of it is clear cutting, that is clearly also an argument to say we will, have fast-growing species. That's good for export, but it's also good for carbon sequestration. Which being, the goal is, if it not already happened, that Sweden is the biggest carbon sink in Europe, basically, and obviously it's already the biggest wood product exporter in Europe, and that is clearly where you have a bit of this conflict between climate change and biodiversity. Also, quick plantations instead of maybe old growth forests. I think, given the time, we like to maybe open up also for questions from the audience. I know there's many people online, and I apologize that it's not practical for us to pick up questions from the online audience, but at least we want to take the opportunity for questions from here in the room, here in Lund. I see one hand, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. But one question from Emily and one question from Noel. For Article 9, I remember it's for removing the barriers on the river's path, right? So I was thinking, who's going to pay for that trouble? Like you funds, but what if we have a power plant on the river, a dam? Who is going to build? Who is going to pay for building another power plant? That's going to give energy to the region. And my question to Hjalmar is that, you said like in different cities we have different priorities, like not all of them. You said Lund is good when it comes to this protection, but then I was thinking, is it because like people choose different city council members in different cities in Sweden that they have like different priorities when it comes to allocating the funds?
I would quickly ask you to maybe repeat the question you're answering to, so our online audience also gets it.
Yeah, so I got the question that who's going to pay for the restoration of watercourses to remove all these artificial barriers. The short answer is that we don't know yet. I'm going to take part in a meeting next week in the Swedish Environmental Agency, where we're going to discuss this with different stakeholders. But of course, in general, in restoration, we want the state to play a big part, but also that the business are going to contribute more financially. Water power plants are not my expert area, but I think today they have a fund with the big companies. They have a fund where you can, they actually do this, that they give resources to make these kind of restoration measures.
So then, was the municipalities how they were if they were having money for nature restoration or not? I think it's one thing is the scale, like the size of the city or municipality, because smaller municipalities sometimes lack the resources. Like they need to fund some things, and that is like schools and healthcare. And then there's not much money left for the rest. But also, like, I guess politics and interest from the citizens. So it's different reasons. But often, like, larger cities are often more forward than smaller ones because of lack of resources in the smaller ones. But all of them, it's not so simple. But it's like, in general.
Thanks very much. We have another question here.
Thank you, and thank you for holding this session. Very interesting. My name is Gunnar Thelin. I'm from a quite new NGO, Regenerative Sweden, Regenerativt Sverige in Swedish. I teach and consult within regenerative agriculture and continuous cover forestry. I'm missing a central factor here, and that's the people who ultimately have most of the power on how we manage ecosystems, the farmers and the foresters. So how can we work with them, in your mind? How can we incentivize them? So, because they are the ones that need to be on track in order for something to actually happen.
Excellent question, Gunnar. I would hand this back to you.
The Swedish Federation for Farmers, LRF, they've been against this law, and that's mainly because of they're worried about the forestry, the big areas restored there, and also for the agriculture, cutting forest and selling is a big income to the companies. But if they knew that they would be economically compensated good for this, I think they would be more pro-restoration. And I would say they're already pro-restoration. They're just not so, they're not as pro legal demands on restoration.
Hjalmar, do you have a view how we can leverage farmers' foresters?
On a local level, like within the Water Council, we have the like LRF represented, for example, and also farmers, and I think that is the discussions within the Water Council is often the pros and cons for the landowner to do such restoration efforts, but and it's about showing the positive effects of for example having they can use water from built dams for their irrigation systems. There are some innovative ways to combine the land use with farming and water management, for example. But I think like regenerative agriculture is one way forward, because you need to look at the incentives for the farmers. I agree. No.
Very good. Thank you. Then we have another question up here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'm an urban planner, so I'm particularly curious about your thoughts on Article 8 and the obligation of having no net loss in regards to urban green space and the urban tree canopy. So I'd like to ask you if you think that we have the tools necessary to satisfy this article, also considering the fact that around 50% of green space in urban areas are found not on public land but on private properties.
Very good.
Yeah, when it comes to this article, unfortunately, we saw some changes when it was negotiated politically. So we lack quality demands. It's only about the extent. So it could be any green area. It doesn't have to have a high value for biodiversity. And also this goal to 2030, it has very big exception. So that's it looks like in Sweden, where we already have quite a big proportion of the area of the cities with green urban spaces compared to other cities in Europe. I think it's not going to mean so much until 2030, but after 2030 we're gonna, as I get it, we're gonna base this on the scientific need, and then you can include quality aspects. That's what I'm thinking and hoping for.
In Lund I think we're gonna have a challenge with densification of the city, and to stay online with this goal, because we are planning to right now to build a lot within those green areas. So, and how to measure that and everything, it's a big challenge, I think. So yeah.
Björn, please.
I have two questions for Emily, please. I wonder, could you please try to help me understand what a non-knowledge-based reporting should be substituted with? And secondly, what happens if an EU member state breaks EU law?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit complicated. The authority, they suggested one way of reporting, as they've done for many years, every 6 years. But the authority don't want them to use ecological knowledge when it comes to grasslands and forest habitat types. But the other habitat types, they're going to use the ecological knowledge. So it's a bit confusing. So when it comes to forest, they're going to use the extent of the habitat type that we had 1995. And that's because that's the year when we entered EU. And this means that we will have to protect like no more forest. We've already accomplished everything, but we haven't accomplished it in a biological sense. And when it comes to grasslands, at least temporarily, they're going to say they don't know the state of the grasslands, even if they know. So it's quite remarkable, I think, that they are doing this. Yeah, and your second question was EU law. Yeah. Yeah, of course, the commission could, they're gonna, when we send in the plan, Sweden sends a plan, they're gonna review this and send the opinions, and then they're expected to change to some part according to these opinions. And if they don't do it, yeah, it could end up there, yeah, paying a lot of fines for not complying with the EU law. Maybe you can complement, because I know this is your area too.
At the end of the day, I think you will be fined if you break EU law.
Yeah.
Now, there is a procedure. It doesn't happen overnight. There is a procedure, as you said. But I think it's good for every one of us to know that if we try to save money by not implementing EU legislation, we might have to pay dearly for that by the end of the day.
Yeah, and I actually experienced this when I was working at the Board of Agriculture in Sweden, because then we were doing the wrong thing with paying support for the grasslands, and that led to extremely high fines to Sweden.
It's a very, very interesting point. If I may just chime in on that briefly. I mean, this is a very general trend we have in international environmental governance over the last years, basically since 2015, that we have something that some scholars, for example, my colleague Thomas Hickman here in Lund, call governing through goals. So we have a bit of a change in the nature of international law until, for example, the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. Countries had to write certain types of commitments into certain treaties, right? How much do we want to reduce our carbon emissions by which year, for example, or our, production of ozone-depleting substances and so forth. And this has tremendously changed in international law. So now when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, or for example, the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which fits very well to this topic, which is from 2022. These Sustainable Development Goals are from 2015. They're very laudable. I mean, they remind us of major goals we should have. But they are very tame and don't have teeth, because it's very easy to sign these goals as a country, so that leads to new treaties. But these treaties do not include any sort of strong sanctioning mechanism, and they do not include a clear trajectory saying what does every country need to do. This is totally left to the countries. They come up with their own voluntary reports, and if they fail to reach certain benchmarks that they set themselves, there will be no grave consequences. We will simply miss these big goals. So there is a big downside to that. And when we take this into perspective now, what we heard from Björn and you, then the EU is one of the big leverages we have in EU law, because there's really consequences. There's a fine to be paid. And that is a leverage we unfortunately do not have on a higher multilateral level. So fines and courts and international jurisprudence, in a way, it might be a way forward to leverage some of these aspects. We see this also in international litigation, lawsuits, and so forth. So maybe also just to add a bit to the ray of hope we may have. So there's not a total lack of mechanisms here. I'm looking around, so there's no further. We might take a very quick intervention from Gunnar, and then that we take this as the last question, and then we will continue over coffee.
Yeah, I'd just like to get back to the idea about compensation as a route forward. I don't believe in it. Okay. Let's face it. If we want to restore about like 500,000 hectares of farmland in Sweden, and we should do that with compensation, like 100,000 per hectare, that's 50 billion Swedish crowns. There's no way that can happen. So instead, we have to work with the farmers. That's the only way forward that's at all possible. And doing that, the chance to get what we actually all want, there's a much better chance to get that with remunerating good practice that actually shows an outcome rather than prescribing management. Doesn't work. Okay.
I think it's a very good final word, and it also chimes back to what we heard about public attention and dialogue that is needed with farmers, with foresters, but also amongst other groups to keep the attention high. I did some shameless advertising for Lund University in different aspects here. I know this is a Europa Direct event, but Europa Direct brought us here together to create this dialogue, and I hope that you carry the word also beyond this forum. If I may advertise a very last thing, that's not on my own behalf, we have several bigger fora here in Sweden for scientists, foresters, farmers, NGOs and so forth to meet, and these are the regular Swedish Biodiversity and Swedish Climate Symposia that we have, and the next one, the Swedish Biodiversity Symposium, will be held in October in Gothenburg, will be also supported by WWF, also by Naturvårdsverket, about 500, 600 people attending. So if you'd like to join, you're all welcome to hopefully intensify this dialogue and get us a bit closer to implementing the restoration regulation. With this, I really like to thank the two presenters again, Emily and Hjalmar, for their very insightful presentations and answers, and particularly also Europa Direct for bringing us here together, Björn and Christina and Simon and others. And I invite you all, and I'd like to thank the audience, of course, online for joining us, and I invite you all to give an applause to our speakers and the organizers. That you are invited to join for coffee and further mingling and talks.